everybody. I'm Brianna. I am with NurseDeck. We are a digital community space built by nurses for nurses. We are all about supporting nurses by providing resources, career guidance, camaraderie, humor, work-life balance strategies, and above all else, just amplifying the voices of nurses through sharing our stories. Today, we are lucky enough to be speaking with, Charlene Platon. Charlene is the Director of Ambulatory Nursing at Stanford Healthcare. She's a board-certified family nurse practitioner, and she is also the creator of Stanford Health first Advanced Practice Providers Administrative Fellowship Program. I'm sure we'll speak a little bit about that in a bit, which works to mentor clinicians into taking leadership roles. Charlene was chosen as one of 12 inaugural Johnson & Johnson Nurse Innovation Fellows, and she's currently developing as the CEO and co-founder a digital wellness platform for healthcare providers called Fifth Window. In her own words, I love this, Charlene aims to transform healthcare delivery and operations at the intersection of compassion, innovation, and technology. So, Charlene, welcome. Thank you for talking to us on this holiday Monday.
And thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Great. So let's jump right in. I know you do a lot of work with nurse leaders and making nurse leaders. What pushed you to become a nurse leader?
Yes, that's a great question. And, I've been a nurse my entire professional career. And throughout the various stages of my career, I just would notice that I would see consistent patterns for different things that would need improvement. And so, for instance, my first role in the outpatient setting was in a nonprofit, and I created a policies and procedures book since we didn't have that standard work in place at the time. And then in the inpatient setting, for my first role as a nurse on the floor, I had noticed that there were challenges with patient throughput. So there had been challenges with admissions and discharges, which caused some delays for patient flow. And so I developed I created a nursing admissions throughput team.
Okay.
And so that really helps with reducing the ED boarding time in our hospital.
Yeah.
And I think just through all these experiences, I just kept having those experiences throughout the different stages of my career. And it just really led me to find that there's so much impact that you can have on healthcare delivery and on patient care on a broader level. And I really saw that in nursing leadership. And I just had a lot of these informal leadership roles.
Yeah.
And I think that's what really naturally brought me to leadership. And, I didn't really go into nursing seeking a healthcare position, but it just kind of kept showing up that way.
Yeah.
And then that led to ultimately my first formal leadership role as a manager of advanced practice at Stanford Healthcare. And then my current role as director of ambulatory nursing at Stanford. So it's been a great journey.
Yeah, that's interesting that you mentioned the informal nursing leadership roles. I feel like that happens a lot with nursing where, anything from walking onto the floor and they're like, surprise, you're the charge nurse today, and sort of getting nominated in real time to be a nurse leader. Do you find that that's been, it sounds like from your experience, something that you've had experience with as well, versus like formally being promoted,
Yeah, there's so many opportunities. I really believe that all nurses are leaders in some way, shape, or form. And it's funny that you mentioned the charge nurse because I became a charge nurse after 4 months as a nurse after I finished my residency. They were like, okay, you're the charge nurse now. And I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah, I know. It's nerve-wracking.
Yeah.
At first, you're like, they see a special light in me. And then after a few months, you're like, wait a minute.
Yeah. And I feel like it just kind of, I don't know, I think you'll hear from a lot of nursing leaders, the positions just kind of come to them or, it's just really interesting how it happens. But I do feel like I either gravitated towards those positions or the opportunities would gravitate towards me. But it's been, it's been an ongoing theme in my career for sure.
Yeah. Too funny. How do we make sure our new nurses are prepared, to provide the level of care that's needed right now, whether that's in leadership roles, at bedside roles? Because I think we can all agree nursing has leveled up, leveled out, um,
Hmm.
taken on new directions in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, this is a really challenging question because I feel that there's not really one single way to prepare nurses, especially with the complexity of healthcare right now, as you mentioned. I think that the preparation really starts at the student level when they are in school, and even before that, I think it all comes down to the exposure that nurses have to the field, the different programs that they're in and the education that they receive there, the training that they receive there, the quality of the preceptorships and the opportunities, because there's so many different programs, and I'm not sure. There's just so many different ways now to become a nurse. You could
Mhm.
become a nurse through an associate's degree, a bachelor's degree, an accelerated bachelor's degree,
Yeah.
a master's degree, an entry level master's degree, a doctorate degree, and through all these different programs, there's just so many different facets and concentrations that nurses can be exposed to. But when it comes to, the actual professional role, I think that there's so much opportunity there because when nurses enter the workforce, the level of preparation is so, so different.
Yes.
And when I was a manager of advanced practice, I primarily focused on supervising nurse practitioners and physician assistants.
Okay.
And they were all different levels of care. They were all different levels of experience. So some were new graduate
Yeah.
advanced practice providers, and some were more seasoned. But the one consistent theme, no matter what level you are in nursing or what position, is that your orientation process needs to be really solid.
Yeah.
So if you don't have a great orientation, that really sets the stage and the foundation for it could really set or make or break the rest of your career at that hospital or that facility. So when I was managing providers, it was really important to me to solidify
Yeah.
that entryway and make it a really great experience, and that ultimately helped them with the rest of the trajectory of their professional careers.
Yeah.
And I would say that that really helped for when I was managing them, because all the advanced practice providers that I hired, they are all still at Stanford. I was able to retain 100% of them. And I think primarily because of that preparation in the orientation. So no matter where you came from in your training or as a student, it's a disservice not to orient them once they're in the role.
Yeah.
Um, but with that being said, too, we do also have a responsibility to provide tools to promote the well-being of our healthcare providers, especially right now.
Yes.
And so you mentioned in your introduction, I'm a Johnson and Johnson Nurse Innovation Fellow, and my primary project in that fellowship has been, leading our startup called Fifth Window.
Yeah.
And so we are a digital wellness platform, and we are providing a lot of these tools for wellness, focusing on physical wellness, psychological wellness,
Yes.
professional wellness, and organizational wellness.
Love
And the
that.
fifth window is the holistic encompassing of all these different facets,
Yeah.
because well-being is not just one dimension, but it's really a lot of different ones.
Yeah.
But these are just some factors from my experience, and I really think that there's a lot of areas for improvement when it comes to preparation for nursing,
Right.
and it's really an ongoing learning as well.
Yeah. I love that. I think that's so important, as you said, to have a strong orientation to level the playing field, because you do have so many nurses that come in from bridge programs that might have never worked at the bedside yet they've, walked out of school with a master's and really have some catch up in real world experience to nurses that have been at the bedside for decades sometimes. So I love that you mentioned that, having a strong orientation program, and then also retaining those nurses in the field with the wellness programs. That's so important, and I think it's so smart. I mean, it's very intuitive to be able to hang on to these nurses that we train and we see something in, to keep them. That's great.
Mhm.
COVID-19. How do you feel about the treatment of nurses and healthcare professionals during COVID-19? Whether at the beginning, the middle, the end,
Mm.
I feel like it's changed so much.
I feel like it's really been kind of a roller coaster of emotions, and I think a lot of nurses and healthcare workers would agree. It's a little confusing too overall, just from just from the beginning of the pandemic and then up until now, where we have vaccinations being distributed, and the divisiveness around the opinions of vaccinations. But overall, I think, overall though, despite the many changes between in terms of the perspective of healthcare professionals and how the general public views them, I think the consistent thing is that healthcare professionals they do have a spotlight now, and there's so much more focus now on healthcare, which I
Yes.
personally think is the attention we've been needing for a long time,
Yes. Agreed.
and the exposure we've been needing, especially in nursing. It was so strange to me to see the general public switch from nurses are janitors to nurses are heroes. And I'm like,
Right.
I just distinctly remember when I was throughout my nursing career, my patients would tell me, like, "Oh, you're just a nurse. When are you going to be a doctor?"
Right.
And I'm like, never.
Yeah.
I'm
Right.
never going to be a doctor. It's two separate careers,
Right. Yeah.
and I went into the nursing profession for a very specific reason.
Exactly.
But there was always, throughout most of my career, there was always the perspective of, nurses are less than, and
Yes.
you're just a nurse. and
Yeah.
and I think that now people are seeing that nurses are very complex in their roles, and they serve a
Yes.
very multifaceted, multidimensional role in the healthcare system.
Right.
And I think now that people are seeing so many nurses are leaving the profession, people are taking notice that nurses are so crucial to the
Yes.
profession, and
Right.
they're really the backbone of the healthcare system, in my opinion. Nurses are the largest segment of the healthcare workforce, and I think that people are finally starting to pay attention to that. And throughout my whole career, I had heard, the notion that nurses are a dime a dozen, nurses are dispensable,
Right.
disposable, and people haven't been shy about that.
Right.
Um, but then now they're like, "Oh my gosh, we need to keep all of our
Yeah.
nurses. We need to make sure that they're happy and
Right.
healthy and safe." And it's just a
Yes.
complete almost 180 from what I've experienced before.
Yeah.
So I would just say that the trajectory has been a really interesting emotional roller coaster,
Right.
but I'm really glad to see that nurses are at the forefront, healthcare workers are at the forefront, the healthcare system in general is at the forefront, and I think a lot of other industries are taking notice, and innovations are now pouring into the healthcare industry as a result. And I think that this was really the push that we needed, because
Yeah.
healthcare innovation has been so stagnant since the
Yes.
80s,
Yes.
70s. And so there's positives, and there's also some interesting um occurrences that have happened throughout this time.
Right.
But overall, I do think that the exposure has been great,
Yeah.
and I do think that we haven't we're not out of the woods yet with COVID-19. So I
Right.
think it'll be interesting to see how everything continues to play out, and how people will continue to view our nurses and our healthcare professionals during this time.
Yeah. Do you think, in some ways, I feel like we've come full circle? Like, we started out at the very beginning of the pandemic with, the 7 p.m. clapping and nurses are heroes, but in a sense, that separates us from people when you're put up on a pedestal that much. You're
Mhm.
still a mystery of what you actually do, Whereas I feel like now it's been in the headlines so often that people are more understanding what nurses do on a day-to-day basis, and their value. So I'm
Mhm.
glad that you brought that up, as the roller coaster that it's been. Hopefully, with innovation, it will help people really see what nurses do, and to retain them so they don't all leave us, because we need them.
Right. Right, and I just distinctly remember before, when I would talk about nursing with peers or other people who were not in the healthcare industry, the first perception of nursing would be, "Oh, all you do is wipe butts, right?" Or like, and
Or
I'm like,
like it's
"Actually, no." I
right.
mean, that's just one of the many different responsibilities of a
Yeah.
nurse, but the responsibility is really to, provide the best care that we can for our patients,
Yeah.
and to each other. And I think that people really are recognizing that,
Right.
wow, nurses do a lot within
Yeah.
a full shift, and there are so many different types of nurses too. So I think people are also beginning to recognize that. And there's not just the inpatient nurse at the bedside, there's the outpatient nurses.
Right.
and there's so many other types of nurses in leadership roles
Yeah.
and in so many different levels of care. So I think that's something really important to emphasize.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree 100%. Um, Community platforms like NurseDeck or Fifth Window, how do you think that community platforms can be a great resource for nurses and nursing students, nurses that are coming to be?
Yeah, I think that community platforms are so important. And, when I was a nurse, a student nurse, I remember that the only major community that we had for nurses was really allnurses.com.
Yeah, right.
And while it was a great platform, I really wish that there was something more that could be more, something to connect nurses to each other, or something where you could learn more about nurses and the different things that they're doing. So I think that highlighting the nursing role and the nursing profession is something great that NurseDeck does. It's something that we're doing with Fifth Window, where we have a monthly spotlight. So we've been highlighting various of professionals in nursing and the different things that they do, while also highlighting their self care practices and their advocacy of well being. And so, it's been great to see how the nursing community has responded to it. And when we were in the early stages of developing the company, I mean, we are still in the early stages, but before we were incorporated, we did a lot of interviews with nurses, and we asked them, what is it that, how are you feeling right now? And many of the nurses by far said that they were feeling isolated,
Yeah.
especially during COVID-19. And even before COVID, I think it's really easy to feel isolated as a nurse.
Yeah.
And you could be in a position where you might not interact so much with other nurses during your shift. And I think that feeling so alone is could be a really significant factor for how you work. And I think the ability to connect with others and to know that you're not alone is really important.
Mhm.
So I think that these communities are great, and there's been more that have been popping up, and I'm just really glad to see, because it does help with creating that exposure that we need
Yes.
to, debunk some of the perceptions of nursing that
Right.
isn't accurate. But then at the same time, it's helping people, encouraging nurses who are and empowering nurses so that they could continue to be engaged and in love with nursing. And
Yes.
I certainly think that being in this community with Fifth Window and seeing NurseDeck and other communities has really inspired me, because I've been able to see, like, wow, nurses do amazing things.
Yeah.
And in my Johnson and Johnson fellowship, I've been connected with 11 other nurses who do incredible things that you would never even, honestly associate with nursing at first. But
Yeah.
now you know that it's all possible, and I think just really goes to show how powerful the profession is.
Yeah, that's such a good point. You're so right, because I think sometimes you think nursing is whatever's right in front of you, whatever you deal with on a daily basis. So just to see the different roles that you could pursue, and what it actually looks like, from
Right.
an insider's perspective, I completely agree, that it keeps people engaged, which we so need right now. Um,
Absolutely.
Quality healthcare and patient safety. What does that mean to you?
My perception throughout all my years of nursing, the first thought that comes to my head when I hear this question is that quality healthcare and patient care safety is the ability to be in an environment where you could speak up and communicate with your team members and not feel guilt, not feel shame, and you're really immersed in a culture where growth is encouraged, where learning is encouraged, and that ultimately will result in quality patient care and safety. And I've just seen time and time again, our current culture of healthcare is very sterile, very cold.
Right.
I mean, I think that it really just depends on the organization that you're in,
Yeah.
but overall, there is a hierarchical structure. It could feel very, it could feel very heavy and very much like that you need to be perfect all the time.
Right.
And so that it feels like there's no room for error. And we all know that there is no one who's perfect. We are not heroes or superheroes, even if we're, put up on a pedestal
Yeah.
that way. We
Right.
do make errors, we do make mistakes, and I think that the more that we pay attention to how much the culture impacts that, the more that we could impact quality healthcare and patient care as a result.
Yeah.
So that's always been at the top of my mind, and I've seen, incidents and events happen because of the lack of the communication, and it's really detrimental. So I think having the safe space allows you to not be afraid, and I think removing ourselves from that fear-based culture will ultimately help increase, staff satisfaction, patient satisfaction, and patient quality care.
Yeah. I think that's so important, and giving nurses the space to feel vulnerable, which is kind of where you go when you need to ask questions that you feel like might expose you for something. Yeah, I think that's such a good point to be able to create an environment where nurses feel like I'm not the only one thinking this, and it's okay to ask these
Right.
questions. Yeah,
Hmm.
that's so important. Um,
Right.
in terms of cost-effective healthcare, what do you think can be done to improve it, if anything? I know that's a huge question that many people spend entire careers trying to answer, but what do you think about things that maybe from a nursing perspective can be done?
Yeah, so cost-effective healthcare is something that's always a goal that I've seen from the different healthcare organizations I've been in. And it makes sense because healthcare is really expensive. So
Mhm.
any areas where you could look at reducing the cost of care or improving the efficiency of care so that it ultimately does cost less is really important. And I do think that that's where nurses can come in, and that's where nurses are do a really, really good job, because they're the ones who are at with the patient for a
Right.
good amount of time throughout the care delivery of the patient, no
Mhm.
matter which facility that they're in.
Mhm.
So I think that nurses can impact that in multiple ways. I mean, it's really a huge range. Just like you said, it's a really big question. It could be as small as, like it could be as small as changing a paper form to a digital form and maybe reducing costs there. But it could also be as big as creating a transitional care program, which would focus more on care coordination and hopefully more team-based care so that a patient doesn't have to constantly go back and forth, between the hospital and the clinic and their home.
Right.
But ultimately too, I think that, and nurses actually lead a lot of those care models too. They do a really great job with care coordination. And I think that that's been where we've been seeing a lot of cost effectiveness in healthcare.
Right.
Um, but I also think just the innovations that nurses create, there's so many nurses that I currently have connected with, and that I work with and that I'm in the fellowship with, and a lot of the innovations that they do ultimately reduce, I think that's probably one of the biggest returns on investment that you'll see is how does it impact the cost of care, and
Right.
it almost always will reduce it
Yeah.
if it's a nurse-led innovation, which is
Yeah.
awesome. Um, and these could be simple products. I mean, just like my co-fellow, Jennifer Mencius, she's the chief operating officer of Lumify Care, and she created with her other nurse chief executive. She created a light called the Unite light, and it's a wearable light that you put on your badge or on your scrubs, and you don't have to keep turning on and off the light
Yeah.
for the patient, but it also can, result in so many other things.
Tell us where you see the future of medicine and healthcare technology going. I know you've done a lot of your work based on innovation. I feel like this is one area of nursing that I am so interested in it, but it's such a vast field that a lot of different people are doing so many different, whether it's like AI or telemedicine or there's so
Mhm.
many different ways that nurses can approach this and be involved with it. So I'm curious to see what your take on it is.
Yeah, I mean, it is a really big question. I feel that the future of medicine and healthcare technology can go in so many different avenues.
Yeah.
One thing I will say though is, especially as someone who's a leader in ambulatory nursing, I do think that the future of healthcare is going to be in ambulatory care. So
Okay.
more innovations that enable ambulatory care, um, uh, so more innovations that enable quality ambulatory care will be something that we'll see in the future, I believe. And so more wearable devices, more innovations where patients can take care of themselves at the home,
Yeah.
and promote probably more home health solutions, or some home health solutions, and really innovations that promote their care at home, I think is what we'll really see in the future. And that could look like AI. I mean, there's so many ways that you could integrate AI now into the technology that we have. And so, I've seen that through software, but there's also a lot of AI that's implemented into hardware.
Mhm.
And, so that would be my first guess is, really innovations that enable ambulatory care to be done, and to be
Yeah.
done well,
Yeah.
and to have a seamless, and that also includes telemedicine, right? Because there's been a lot of improvements with telehealth care, and how nurses and physicians and patients have been connecting outside of a clinic room or outside of a hospital room,
Yeah.
whether it's through video or through phone or video conferencing. I think
Mhm.
that will continue to be improved and even more seamless.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that there's going to be more companies that focus on that and how to make the experience even better, because right now there are some areas for improvement there. And then, of course, I think more nurse-led innovations will happen.
Mhm.
So, and that could be inside of the hospital, outside of the hospital. But I think nurses are so clever and creative and so smart. Like the technologies that they build
Yeah.
are things that might seem so simple, but they're
Yeah.
crucial to care delivery.
Yeah.
But they also can create really complex things. I've been seeing nurses work on robotics, helping with supply chain challenges, and helping
Yeah.
with other challenges that nurses encounter on a day-to-day basis,
Right.
but you don't
Right.
really think about it too much
Yeah.
if you're not in the field. So I think that's what we're going to see more of as well. But that's really only the tip of the iceberg. I feel like as we continue to progress, especially with the idea of nurse-led innovation, and continue to empower nurses and other healthcare workers to innovate, there's really no limits to what the healthcare technology will look like. I'm really looking forward to it. I'm really excited about what that could be, and there's no telling where how it will continue to grow. So that's one of the things I'm most excited about.
Yeah. I think like what the example you were giving of the nurse that created that little light, just reminded me when I had my boys like a year ago almost now, just the little things like that, like trying to find a light when they're coming in at the middle of the night, trying to flip on, not wake everybody up and letting the patient get
Mhm.
their rest. And I think nurses, like you said, they're so smart at finding those little things of just making it work and getting it done that really have an impact on patient quality and ultimately their recovery and their health. So it is like
Right.
those. I mean, the big things are very exciting and splashy and fun to talk about, but the little things I think make up an experience oftentimes for patients. So, and I think, like you
Right.
said, nurses are so good at that stuff. Um,
Mhm.
Tell me, you have done so much in your career already. Where do you get your work ethic from?
That's a great question. I think a lot of it just comes from my upbringing, but I actually come from a family of nurses.
Okay.
So my mother's a nurse, my twin sister's a nurse. I
Yeah.
have aunts who are nurses and cousins who are nurses. So I feel like nursing just runs through our veins and
Yeah.
our blood. And I
Right.
mean, I remember growing up, I've always been comfortable in a healthcare setting.
Right.
Um, and I think I think that background and that exposure to nursing really helped me to be familiar with the profession. But
Yeah.
then when I really got into it, I just became so passionate about providing care for others, and really what you said earlier in my bio about that intersection of
Um,
compassion, technology, innovation,
yeah.
and the patient experience, because I really think that the combination of all those facets is what's really going to drive healthcare in a great direction.
Yeah.
And I think that's really what motivates me to do the things that I do, to be in healthcare leadership, to be in innovation, and to do things that are, outside of the box, because
Yeah.
that's what's needed to
Yeah.
drive this change. And that's really what inspires me. Um, but um, but everyone has a different why, and I think that that really drives them, and the focus of what they want to do. And I
Yeah.
think that each nurse has their why, and it really will lead them to do different things in the healthcare profession just based on what it is that they're really passionate about. And there's so many different niches in healthcare that whatever your why is can have profound impacts on that field of healthcare and on that field of patient care. So I think everyone has, for everyone, it shows up in different ways. But for me, I really get my why is really focused on that intersection of compassion, patient experience, technology, and how we could continue to improve the environment that we're in.
Yeah, that's awesome. Tell me from your perspective as someone that works with administration and with nurses in practice, as like a pulse check right now on how you all are feeling about, we're at this point right now where healthcare really, we do have a chance to hopefully change some things about it. I think COVID has brought so much up to the surface of really what's not working and what hasn't worked for a very long time. Do you feel like the pulse check is more one of hope and excitement and here's our chance? Or do you feel like it's more of, oh my gosh, we have our work cut out for us? Or is it a little bit of both?
That's a great question. I think that the pulse check really depends on your organization. I think it really depends on where you live, the resources that you have access to, your social determinants of health.
Yeah.
And, you know, overall, I think that it is a mix though. I think that there are moments when it just feels like an uphill battle and that it will almost never end. But then at the same time, I mean, I'm really fortunate to be in an organization that has been doing such an amazing job throughout this pandemic to help provide resources and tools to nurses, PPE, and then also well-being resources. And that's been really motivating. And another thing too is that where you are, the culture is really important and the leadership's really important.
Yes.
So depending on how the culture is of your organization or the culture is of your leadership, it will really set the stage for how you're feeling internally and whether there is a light at the end of the tunnel or whether it's a little dimmer than you would want it to be.
Yeah.
I really am someone who I think I love to keep an overall positive perspective about the future, and I think that's really necessary now. I mean, I've seen so many silver linings though that it is really encouraging. I think the overall net is positive for me, and I think that the technologies that are coming through, including the vaccinations, have been a really important piece of our progress right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that as long as we continue on that path and continue to focus on, hopefully not focus too much on what's gone wrong, because you could go down that spiral and you will never come out of it.
Yeah, exactly.
But if you focus on the possibilities, I think that could really happen. But it is also, there is a responsibility that we have in leadership, in healthcare, and as a general public to ensure that we have everything as best as we can to give us the best shot that we can. Because if we're not really giving anything to the nurses, then they can't really use anything.
Yeah.
I mean, there is the individual motivation and component, but there's also the whole, community at large. So I think there's really a necessity on both parts and a responsibility on both parts.
Yeah.
But I'm feeling optimistic overall still.
I can feel that from you. So I think that gives me hope, and I'm sure it gives other nurses out there hope, and especially because you do work in leadership roles. So that, of course, is going to trickle down. So that's great. Anything that I can tell our viewers and our listeners about where they can read more or hear more about the work that you're doing? Like websites or?
Yeah, of course. I'm everywhere on social media,
Okay.
but I'm most active on LinkedIn. So you could follow my LinkedIn page or connect with me at Charlene Platon
Okay.
on LinkedIn. I'm also on Twitter But you could also find out more about what we're doing with Fifth Window on our
Yeah.
LinkedIn page with Fifth Window, or visiting our webpage at www.fifthwindow.com.
Okay.
And we're working on the newer version of our app right now. We had done some beta testing in the last few months and had a good group of nurses test out our app.
Okay.
But the newer version of our app we're working on it right now, so it should be ready by this fall. So hopefully, if anyone's interested, just let me know, and we'd love to have you on board.
Great. Awesome. It sounds really, really cool. So needed right now. I think all the support that nurses can get from any direction is amazing. So that's
Absolutely.
all the questions I have for you today. Thank you so much for taking time out of your very busy schedule and talking with us.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. It was really great to talk with you today.
Awesome. All righty. We're all set. Thanks, Charlene.